have a realistic conversation about even the costing structure of capital projects. If you make comparison with other emerging economies, you realize that Nigeria, in terms of capital expenditure delivery, have one of the highest and costliest. That is 2. Number 3, let us also have realistic conversation about the allowances and salaries of political office holders and members of National Assembly and State Houses of Assembly at both federal and national level. The costing, what goes to them in terms of allowances, is completely disproportional to the economic reality of this country as it is today. That is 2. Number 3, let us also look at the tax structure and the taxes we are collecting. Who is paying what? Who is not paying what? Of course, you cannot be able to increase taxes in the context of our economic reality beyond a certain threshold, but you can make structural improvements in the collection process and also in the spending process. We also need to have realistic conversation as to how we cost projects at the federal level. And I say this, and I'm challenging anybody to contradict me. If you go to any ministry, agency, or department, particularly at the federal level, nobody can give you a certification that the costing template of any capital expenditure is undertaken by a member of the Nigerian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, which is the statutory agency that is supposed to do that. People just sit down, concoct costs, and therefore the reason why our costing of capital projects is extremely on the high side. But in addition, it is also expedient in a democracy where people vote for those in power, for the same people in power to be more transparent with them on how their resources are spent. I think these are issues that at National Economic Council, the federal government and the state government and the private sector and all other stakeholders, honestly, we need to sit down and have a realistic conversation, because the way we are going, even the 8.8 trillion we are spending at federal level, and then when you make an average analysis, even if the country is spending 20 trillion, you realize that that money is so insignificant relative to other emerging economies that are in our peers. In 2018, Brazil budgeted at federal level, not at the regional or state level, over $1 trillion. But that money, a significant proportion of it, is provided by public-private partnership. I have alluded to this, and I will continue to talk about this, that the structure of our economy as it is today, the collection level of our taxes, the revenue from oil and its pricing, cannot provide adequately to sustainably fund developmental intervention in the context of our need. And therefore, we need non-debt, sustainable sources of funding, big-ticket capital projects. But importantly also...
Not to fund recurrent.
Not to fund recurrent, but
private capital will not come to fund agencies.
Yes, to fund capital. Because a situation whereby you are borrowing so much from China, the Chinese have an inherent interest in Nigeria, and the interest may not be in parity with our national interest. And therefore, if you are borrowing so much and you are spending almost over 60% of our actual income in order to service both local and domestic debt, it tells you that in the long run and the short run, that type of expenditure, infrastructure funding is absolutely unsustainable. What we need is a more reliable, more higher quantum, but a more sustainable funding infrastructure mechanism, which a lot of other emerging economies have adopted, courtesy of the transparent policy framework and laws that guide public-private partnership that make it attractive for for others to bring their resources and then complement domestic resources that are available in the country.
Funding infrastructure mechanism. We did raise a number of very important issues with respect to this conversation. Well, reading through a passage on this budget, and I came across a school of thought that is saying that considering the embarrassing underdevelopment quagmire of the country, that, one would be safe to say that all the budgets that Nigeria has had since 1960 could not achieve up to 40% success in terms of implementation. And that brings us to the issue of a failed budget. But how can a nation, a developing nation, become fully developed when it has insufficient funding for capital expenditure? A situation where even the recurrent expenditure does not meet its target. For instance, we know in this country that many states had been unable to pay salaries, pension benefits, and other entitlements to workers, and that underscores the issue of a failed recurrent expenditure. And I'd like Sir So Good to come in here, because you are the final gatekeepers with respect to budget processing in the country. Where have we got it wrong? And I want you to come from the point of view of what happens at the level of state and local government budgeting.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy and appreciate this discussion that for once we are bringing in the state and the local government. Because everything we talk about this country is the federal government, National Assembly. We don't talk about the state assembly. We don't even talk about commissioners. When was the last time you heard that in the state a commissioner served an EFCC pursuing such a commissioner? Or even a local government? Like Olaniye said, we don't even have the budget of the local government because they don't run budgets. If they run any budget, I don't know how they do it. A situation where in this country now, the state government under President Obasanjo, I know they used to publish in the news, NTA, publish what they share every month. The federal government, each state, and then the local government. People knew then what the local government would get for that month. But I think now you have to go on the internet or something to Google that. I don't know where they still display that. It's important for people to know. It's not a situation where that money is paid to the state government and they just give the local government, the selected, not elected local government chairman, something for salaries and emolument. So if I go back to your question, I think the last time I was here, we were talking about a government that should work for this country. And some of us proposed the parliamentary system of government. We need to work, we need a homegrown solution. Don't just copy and paste. Our budget as it is today will not work. I have talked about the interface between the executive and the legislators not working well. That's why we have delays in passing these budgets. But the most important thing, there was this Harvard law review that said that we shouldn't be giving attention to GDP. We should have gross domestic happiness. But unfortunately, we talk, because the GDP, the man on the streets, the relevance of that GDP is not, it doesn't feel it. So my suggestion is, I think Olaniyi said that projects should be relevant in the constituencies or in the localities. That's why you have the elected people. If it's really working, if you elect a representative, that representative should be there. Is your eye and your ears, either in the state and capital or in Abuja. So I should be able to identify projects that my constituents need. That's why we go for briefing. And they tell me, we don't need the primary healthcare center. What we need is a school. And I'll say, yes, sir. And I bring that here and I put that in the zonal intervention project. So that at the end of the day, they can feel the impact of government. But as it stands today, now we are talking about spending more than 60% on recurrent. So government ideally is not meant to what's the word now? Government should be run like a business. There is no private business that can spend over 60% on recurrent and exist. It will go under immediately. And we expect government to spend over 60%, 70% on recurrent, and we expect to be profitable. It's not going to happen. That's why we're running deficit. Like Dr. Abuja said, we are spending 2.something trillion, on debt servicing, and then maybe even less than 2 trillion on capital. Like the Minister of Budget and Planning said, we do not have a budget problem or budget issue, but we have funding problem. Well, if I start on this funding project, we will not end here today. That's the topic for another day discussion. Because I strongly believe, besides relying on oil, we need to allow investors come into this country and invest their money. That's where we are missing this big time. So well, that money is not coming, and it's not going to come soonest because where we are in this country. Because the first thing anybody will ask you, if I will ask you now, my brother Tinsley, will you want to go and invest in Syria as it stands today? You want to go to Syria, not even Baghdad, not even Afghanistan. But we are placed in the same category with these people. So till we sort out our home problem here, and investors come with their cash, with their dollars to invest, and then employ people, it's not the way we employ in the public sector that they employ in the private sector. It's what they need that they take. But because government has not been able to sort out their act and be profitable, they tend to be creating employment where they don't need it. The last time they were talking about minimum wage, I said it in the private sector. If labor says I must pay 100 naira to a person, there's no problem. But I will work that person around the clock to earn that 100,000 naira. But in the public sector, it's not like that. People don't have to come to work to earn a salary. Who is watching? No consequence management. If I was, okay, now, for example, INEC chairman, you gave us a date of an election. Everybody prepared. You had how many years to plan for it? On the eve of the election, it was cancelled. How much did you deploy? Budget, you have subheads. How much has any spent on supplementary? Is there a subhead for supplementary? Is there a subhead for cancellation? But who is asking questions? That money is spent and nobody is punished. Tomorrow you have another INEC chairman that will do exactly the same thing. He will not be sacked. He will not be jailed. And we say it's going to happen. Well, Nigeria is going to change for good. Just elect another man. It's not going to work.
All right, Honorable Sergio Sojo, thank you very much for your perspective. Dr. Utive Buzo, still on this subject matter, you know, taking a holistic view now, more particularly at the subnational level, what can we do to begin to get more money, more value for the money that we are spending through the budgetary process? I mean, there are concerns, for instance, as to who really is in charge of the budget. When governors and local government chairmen, to a lesser extent, are referred to as emperors, almost invariably the implication is that the governor, or some governors, or some chairmen, just regard this as their out-of-pocket expenses. That's the state budget. And the consequence that we face is, looking at the priority areas of spend that you ticked off,